Hello everyone and welcome back to the authoring webinar series. So thank you for joining us for April's authoring webinar. And this one's all about Learnosity's item and question auto scoring capabilities. So just to introduce myself as always, my name is Niamh Casey and I'm an authoring expert at Learnosity. So before we begin, I just want to point out to you that you have all been automatically put on mute, but if you'd like to ask a question at any stage, you can do so using the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a question section available there, which you'll see in this image on the screen. You can also email authoring@learnosity.com if you have any follow-up questions. And the session is being recorded, so anyone who is registered will be sent the recording this week. So in today's webinar, we're going to take a look at auto scoring options in Learnosity. So we will look at the three different item scoring types. So we have per question, dichotomous, and dependent or EBSR. Then we'll look at the three different question scoring types, so exact match, partial match per response, and partial match. We'll take a look at configuring alternate answers on a question, and then lastly, we will look at the additional scoring options in the question editor. So the majority of Learnosity question types are auto-scored. There are a few that don't have the option of auto-scoring, like our essay questions, our audio question, and our video question, among some others. But the three question scoring types are only available on auto-scored questions, as are the additional scoring options we'll go through later on in the webinar. And then as for our three item scoring types, they will work with items that contain only auto-scored questions or a mixture of manually graded questions and auto-scored questions. So first up, we'll take a look at item scoring. So item scoring is referring to how the overall score of an item is calculated, and this is regardless of the number of questions within the item. So the item scoring type does not impact other items in an assessment, and each item score is independent of other items. So there are three item scoring types available, as I mentioned. There's per question, dichotomous, and dependent or EBSR. Item scoring types can be configured on the author site, just using the blue sidebar, which can be accessed when you're editing an item or editing a question. So that's what you see on the screen here. And if you're using the embedded author API, then item scoring types are only configured programmatically at the moment, but we are developing a user interface for this. So it'll be a similar idea to what we have on the author side already. So I'll take a look at per question scoring first. So per question is the default item scoring type, and it's likely to be the one you'll use the most. So the item score with this scoring type is calculated by adding the scores achieved on each question within the item, and the resulting value is the item score. So in the example on the next slide, a correct answer is worth 10 points, a partially correct answer is worth 5, and an incorrect answer is obviously worth 0. So in this example, question 1 is correct, so it carries 10 points. Question 2 is partially correct, so it carries 5 points, and question 3 is also partially correct, so it carries 5 points, and it leads to an overall score of 20. So if I were to get everything correct on this item, I'd receive a score of 30. If I were to get 2 questions wrong and 1 correct, I'd receive a score of 10, and so on. And that's per question scoring. It's really, really simple, a very straightforward scoring type. So now we'll move on and we'll take a look at the dichotomous scoring type. So dichotomously scored items only have 2 outcomes for the item score, either full points or no points. So an item is either correct or incorrect. So unlike per question scoring, no marks are awarded to the student here for partial correctness. So if I had an item with maybe 5 questions on it, no points would be awarded if I got 4 questions on the item fully correct and then 1 question partially correct. So we'll just have a quick look at an example. So here I've gotten question 1 correct, and that carries 10 marks, and questions 2 and 3 partially correct, each carrying 5. So partial correctness is not enough to warrant points in the dichotomous scoring type, so I must get every question correct in order to receive my points. So in this scenario, I receive a score of 0. Really, here I can only receive a score of 0 or 30 because of dichotomous scoring. And then the final item scoring type is dependent or EBSR, and that stands for evidence-based selected response. So with dependent item scoring, in order to achieve marks for a correct answer, the previous question on the item must have been answered correctly. So essentially the score a student receives on a question is dependent on the outcome of the previous question that they answered on that item. So we'll just have a look at an example, and again, a correct answer is worth 10 marks. Partially correct is worth 5 and incorrect gets 0. So question 1 here is correct, so I'm awarded 10 points. And because question 1 is correct, I have the opportunity to receive points for a correct or a partially correct response on question 2. So I get question 2 partially correct, and that gives me another 5 points on this item. But because question 2 is partially correct and not actually correct, I don't get any points for a correct or a partially correct response on question 3. So in this case, I've answered 3 correctly. However, with dependent item scoring, I will only receive points for a correct answer if the previous question, which in this case is question 2, is correct. So at the end of this item, I receive a score of 15 out of 30. So I get 10 points for a correct answer to question 1, 5 points for a partially correct answer for question 2, and then I get 0 points for a correct answer on question 3 because question 2 was not correct, only partially correct. And those are our 3 item scoring types: per question, dichotomous, and dependent or EBSR. So now we'll take a look at question scoring. So question scoring types are used to calculate how points are distributed on a particular question. So a question scoring type is unrelated to any other questions in the same item or assessment. And question scoring types can be configured in the drop-down menu in the More Options section of the question editor. So you can see that highlighted in red on this image here. And there are at most 3 scoring types to choose from in a question. So some questions might have less. Not all scoring types make sense for all questions, but the 3 main scoring types are exact match, partial match per response, and partial match. I'll also reference the question's points quite a lot, and you can set the points for a question in the points field of the question editor, just under the Set Correct Answers heading. So the first of our 3 main scoring types is exact match, and this is the default scoring type in all of our auto-scored questions. So with exact match, the question is either correct or incorrect, very much like the dichotomous item scoring type we covered. So no points are awarded to the student for partial correctness. So if a question carried 3 points and had 3 correct answers, the outcome is either 3 points or 0 points for the student. So just in this example here, I'm selecting the exact match scoring type. In preview then, when I select the correct answer, you'll see I receive 1 out of 1 on the top right corner here. If I select the correct answer and an incorrect answer, I receive a score of 0 because it's not fully correct. And obviously, if I select an incorrect answer, I'm going to get a score of 0. So next up, we have partial match per response question scoring, and this awards the student for a partially correct response. So with this scoring type, the value you set in the points field in the question editor is the value that each correct answer will carry. So for example, if I had a multiple choice question with 2 correct answers and 1 set in the points box, each correct answer will be worth 1 point, and the question will have an overall score of 2. So we'll just look at another example here. So I'm selecting partial match per response in the drop-down menu here, and then you'll see that I'll set the validation for the question. I have the value of 1 in my points box, and I'm setting 2 correct answers. So each correct answer will carry a value of 1. Now if I preview, I can see that I receive 1 mark for the first correct answer, and then another mark for the second correct answer, giving me a score of 2 of 2. And then finally, we have the partial match scoring type, which is just like partial match per response in that it rewards the student for a partially correct response. In partial match, the value in the points box is divided by the number of correct responses set in validation. So the resulting figure is what each correct answer is worth. So say if I have a points value of 1 in my question, and there are 3 correct answers, each correct answer will actually be worth 0.33 marks. So it's entirely possible to have decimal values as a score with any of our question scoring types. It's also important to take note of the additional rounding drop-down menu that appears with partial match scoring. So you have 2 options to select from here. You've none and round down. So selecting round down will round the score down to the nearest whole number, and selecting none will have no effect on the score. So if you want the student to receive a mixture of whole numbers or decimal value scores and you don't really have a preference, then just select none. And if you strictly want the scores to be whole numbers only, then select round down. So I have an example here of partial match. So I'll just select it from the drop-down. Then you'll see the rounding drop-down menu appear. So in this particular instance, it doesn't actually matter whether I select round down or none, as I'm not dealing with decimal values. Then I'll scroll back up and I'll just set my validation for the question. So you can see I have 4 points in my points box. So that means that each correct answer is going to be worth 1 point. So if I preview the question, I see that I'll get 1 point out of 4 for my first correct answer. You can see that in the top right corner. 2 out of 4, 3 out of 4, and then 4 out of 4. And that's all of our question scoring types covered. So now we'll move on and I'll show you how to add alternative correct answers to a question. So when you're setting a correct answer in a question, it is also possible to add alternative correct answers. So you can give these answers any points value that you like. It could be more, less, or the same as your original correct answer. But you shouldn't need more than a few alternate answers at most on your question. So if you find you're working with a lot of alternate answers, there's often a different scoring type you could use, or maybe a different question type you can use. So let's take a look at an example showing you how to actually add your alternate answers. So in this question here, I've already set up my correct answer and I've given that 1 point. So I'm going to click on the blue plus button and I'm going to add an alternate response. So it looks just like the validation area of my original correct answer. So I'll enter in my correct answer and then I can configure a points value. So I'll change that to 0.5. So now if I go and preview my question and I enter in the correct answer, you'll see I do receive my 1 of 1, which is fine, that's expected. And then if I enter in my correct alternate answer, you'll see that I'll receive a score of 0.5 out of 1 in the top right corner there. So one thing to note with alternate answers is that they don't know that the other exists. So the correct answer doesn't know that the alternate answer exists, or if you have various alternate answers, they don't know that the other exists. So they're kind of operating as separate entities. But we do have an exception to this rule, and that's in fill in the blanks questions. So we have this new option called match all possible responses. So this allows you to mix responses from different correct answers. And again, this is just in fill in the blanks questions for now. So we'll have a look at these two images from the question editor. So in the top, I validated a question with one set of correct answers. And then down here, I've added an alternate answer to this response where I've set staircase and a lift. My problem here is that I can't mix responses from these two answers. So I can't mix stairs with a lift and I can't mix staircase with an elevator. If I wanted to do that, I'd have to set up 2 more alternate answers. So that's where the match all possible responses option comes in. So it allows me to mix my answers so that I could accept something like stairs and a lift or staircase and an elevator. So I'll show you an example of how that looks. So here I've already set my validation. Let me just rewind. I've already set my validation for stairs and an elevator. And then I'm going to click on the blue plus button to add an alternate answer where I add in staircase and a lift. And then I'm going to turn on the match all possible responses option. Okay, so this is what allows me to merge my 2 responses. You'll see as well that the points field has been grayed out. So that means that I can't set points for this alternate answer. They're going to take on whatever points value I've set in my original correct answer. So just remember, when you use match all possible responses, the points value is going to be the same for all responses in the question. So we'll just do that and I'll go into preview now. And you can see I can mix stairs with a lift and I can mix staircase with an elevator, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without that match all possible responses option. So now I'm going to take a look at some other additional question scoring options, and these are all located in the more options field of the question editor. So first, we'll take a look at the unscored or practice usage option, and this will strip scoring from a question entirely. So using this option is not equivalent to turning an auto-scored question into a manually scored question. And this is because a question with the unscored or practice usage option will be ignored by reports, and it can never be given a non-zero score. So if a teacher tried to set a score for it in review mode, it wouldn't work. So next we'll have a look at our minimum score if attempted option. So points for attempting a question can be awarded to the student this way, and it's controlled by this minimum score if attempted field. So whatever value you've entered in here will be awarded to the student for an attempt, even if it's totally incorrect. So we'll have a look at an example of that. So here you can see I have a validation set for this question. I have given the question 5 points. And I'm going to scroll down and set a minimum score of 1. So this means that I could enter any answer as a response and I'll still receive a score of 1 just for attempting the question at all. So I'll enter in a completely incorrect answer here. And you can see in the top right corner, I still receive a score of 1 out of 5. So next up, we'll take a look at the check answer button. So I've been using this throughout the videos, the video examples in the webinar. So the check answer button can be enabled or disabled with this checkbox here. It's actually disabled by default. So when you turn it on, the student can click on it when they enter a response, and it'll indicate to them whether their response is correct or incorrect, but it won't give them any indication as to what the correct response actually is. So it's not like a hint or anything like that. And it's also possible to control the number of times this button is clicked as well. So you just use the check answer attempts field over here. It's actually set to 0 by default, which means an infinite number of times. So you can limit that to like 1 attempt if you want. Then we have the option to include penalty points in your question. So penalty points are deducted from the student's score for every incorrect answer they enter in the question. But it can behave slightly differently depending on the scoring type you use in the question. So it's important to note at this point that negative scoring is disabled by default in Learnosity. So once a student's score hits 0, it won't drop lower even if they keep selecting incorrect answers. Now you can enable it if you want, it's just turned off by default. So unless you've allowed negative scoring, penalty points will not impact the score on an exact match question because the score is either full points or 0 points. When you combine penalty points with something like partial match per response scoring, penalty points are very straightforward. So whatever value has been entered in the penalty points field will be deducted from the student's score each time they select an incorrect response. So let's just look at that and see how it looks. So in this video, I have 4 correct answers. I have each correct answer carrying 1 point. So I'm going to go down to my penalty points field and I'm going to set that value to 2. So this just means every time the student selects an incorrect answer, 2 points will be deducted from their score. So first of all, I'm selecting all of the correct answers on the question, so I receive a score of 4 out of 4. Then if I select an incorrect answer, I receive a score of 2 out of 4, and then another incorrect answer, and I have a score of 0 out of 4. So when you use penalty points with partial match scoring, the partial match scoring will actually also apply to the penalty score. So just to remind you how partial match scoring works, the points value is divided by the number of correct responses on the question. So the same rule will apply to using partial match with penalty scoring. So because partial match also applies to the penalty score, this means that the penalty score is also divided by the number of correct options on the question, and that's your actual penalty score value. So we'll have a look at a video example to make that a bit clearer. So in this example, I have a multiple choice question with 6 response options again. 4 are correct. We'll just rewind a little. So 4 are correct. I have 4 set as my value in the points box. So each correct answer is going to carry a score of 1. Then in my penalty points box, I've entered a value of 8. So remember that with partial match, I need to divide this value here, so 8, by the number of correct response options on the question, which is 4, so that's 2. So that means 2 points will be deducted for every incorrect response on this. So I'll click play and we'll just go into preview and we'll see that I'll select all of the correct responses first and I'll get a score of 4 out of 4. Then I'll select an incorrect answer and I'll get a score of 2 out of 4, and then eventually a score of 0 out of 4 for selecting another incorrect answer. So now I just have one more additional scoring option to review. So although we have 8 question types that are manually scored, it is possible to convert any of our auto-scored questions into manually scored questions. So this can be done in the question editor, just using this enable auto-scoring checkbox you see down here. And that's just in the more options section of the question editor. So this option is turned on by default, but turning it off will actually strip the scoring from the question and convert it to a manually graded question. So any question can be converted to a manually graded question this way. So that brings the main part of our webinar to an end, and I welcome you to use the questions section of your GoToWebinar panel if you have any comments or questions about what I've covered today. I'll just do a very quick recap of what we covered. So first, we looked at the different item scoring types available. So we've per question scoring, where the item score is calculated by adding points for each question. Then we have dichotomous scoring, where the item is either correct or incorrect and there's no in between. Then we looked at dependent or EBSR scoring, where the outcome of a question depends on the outcome of the previous question, and then those scores are added up at the end. Then we looked at the different question scoring types available. So we've exact match, where your question is either correct or incorrect. We have partial match per response, where each correct answer carries the points value entered in the points field of the question editor. And then we looked at partial match, where the value calculated when the points value is divided by the number of correct answers on the question is the value that each correct answer is worth. Then we looked at using alternate answers to give students more opportunities to receive points for a question, as well as the new match all possible responses option that is unique to fill in the blanks questions. And that allows us to just merge different alternate answers and correct answers together. And finally, we had a look at some of the additional scoring options in the more options section of the question editor. So we looked at minimum score if attempted, penalty points, the check answer button, the unscored practice usage option, and the enable auto scoring option as well. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Once the webinar finishes, a very short survey will pop up on screen, which I welcome you all to do, and it's just to provide us with information around ideal scheduling times and topics. And that's all from me for the moment, and I hope to see you at our next authoring webinar. Thank you for joining, and goodbye for now.